Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, I am your host this morning, Tiffany Norde, the worship producer here at Sycamore Creek Church. And alongside me, I have Miss Carola as my co-host this morning.
Hi, good morning, everybody.
Yes, so we are welcoming you this.
Oh,
Carola.
that's okay. Well, I'm pretty excited about this series that we're just starting today for episode 1 of What Would Jesus Say? And today we're talking about our divided nation, which is a pretty hot topic.
Yes, so we got Pastor Mark leading us in this this new journey, this new series.
Spicy journey.
Yeah, so tune in and let's learn together. We have this chatterbox question: how good are you at admitting that you might be wrong?
It's just starting right out of the gate. Like, go on, tell us about it. And we're going to bring it to our guest here with You May Be Right.
And we have with Doug.
With Doug, yes.
Friday night I crashed your party. Saturday I said I'm sorry. Sunday came and trashed it out again. We were only having fun, wasn't hurting anyone, and we all enjoyed the weekend for a change. I was stranded in that combat zone, walked through Bedford style alone, even rode my motorcycle in the rain. Yeah, you told me not to drive, but I made it home alive. Yeah, you said that only proves that I'm insane. You may be right, I may be crazy, but it just may be a lunatic you're looking for. Too late to find, too late to save me. You may be wrong for all I know, but you may be right. Now remember how I found you there, alone in your electric chair. You told me dirty jokes until I smiled. You were lonely for a man. I said take me as I am, 'cause you might enjoy some madness for a while. Now think of all the years you tried to find someone to satisfy you. I might be as crazy as you say. If I'm crazy, then it's true that it's all because of you. But you wouldn't want me any other way. You may be right, I may be crazy, but it just may be a lunatic you're looking for. Too late to find, too late to save me. You may be wrong for all I know, but you may be right. You may be wrong, but you may be right. You may be wrong, but you may be right. You may be wrong, but you may be right.
Woo!
Woo!
Yeah, thank you, Doug.
I liked that acoustic version.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
nice. That was good.
Yeah, and that song is perfect for the question that we pose to you guys and all of us. This is our time to be truthful and honest.
It's time, yeah.
You may be wrong, but you may be right.
Yeah, Mark Raymond says that he's getting better at admitting that he's wrong, and I understand that. That's it's a practice. It's not something that comes automatically. You know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. I know I put that. I feel like I'm getting better because the reason why I would more often admit that I'm wrong when I am because I'm looking for the same. Same thing coming in return.
True.
Especially in relationships and stuff like that. If I want, partner
I'm
or
sorry
friends.
for my part, but you wronged me too.
So yeah.
I think, I can admit that I'm wrong in certain situations. Like, if it has to do with me, like, oh, I messed up that song, or, oh, shoot, I forgot to do that. But, like, if it's something where I have to admit someone else is right, that's a whole nother thing.
Oh,
especially depending on who it is, There's certain people that maybe I feel more prideful toward, so I don't want to, like, admit, like, oh, I was wrong and you were right, That's not my favorite.
Because it totally takes a lot of humility to do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What about you, Doug? How good are you at admitting you might be wrong?
You sang the
or
song.
Or that you may be crazy?
I think,
go ahead and lean into the mic.
I think that I can admit when I'm wrong.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I'm not very much of a confrontational.
Right.
Very much, but yeah, if I'm wrong, I usually admit it.
That's awesome. That's good. I love to see the humility of it. It's great.
It's definitely, though, like you said earlier, it's a practice.
It is.
You got to do it in the little things so you can do it in the big things.
Yes.
That is true.
We have totally talked about that before, too.
Yeah.
Well, friends, if you are joining us today, you are finding yourself at Sycamore Creek, South Lansing for our live worship service. And you can go ahead anywhere you are, whether you're at YouTube or on our website or here on Facebook, wherever, like the video, share it out to your friends so that they can watch alongside you. Subscribe to our channel so that you know when we are going to go live. That's the best way to get updates. If you've got prayers on your hearts or you want to connect with us and serve and grow together, head to sycamorecreekchurch.org/connect to fill out that connection card online. It's super easy. You give us however much information you want. You can send in a prayer there, or you can send us prayers at that email on the screen as well. And if you're a first-time guest with us this morning, you'll get a free book. This is You'll Get Through This by Max Lucado. It's helped so many people, especially during the pandemic these past couple years. I can't believe I have to say it like that.
Right.
But here we are, right? And you'll get through this, and we can get through this. So fill out that connection card and allow us to send that book to you this morning. You can also let us know where you are this morning. Take a selfie, #SCCMI, so that we can see your beautiful face. You don't even have to take a selfie. You could take a picture of your coffee or your cat. I would love that personally. And this week, we have these gorgeous pictures. Oh my gosh. From Ellie's Place 5K, the Capital Region 5K that we did here.
And our selfie of the week is Kathy.
Yes.
And she participated in that.
Kathy Larson. And Kathy put up the mile markers that she's doing.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so you can see how many miles she's doing for the 5K. And look at this. We also have Dave Hemingway and Kathy Doby. And we have Pastor Tom and his children, Micah and Sam, who then got to go to Insomnia Cookies.
Which
a
apparently
nice
a
5K
in biking is like, what, 15 miles or something crazy?
Yes. Well, we did hear that from Charlie Dobson, who's training for the Olympics, so we have to trust her, right?
We trust Charlie.
Yes. And here's Tom with Dawn Hadid, who organized and is she
I think she's like the director.
The director of Ellie's Place for the Capital Region.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was such a wonderful experience. Thanks so much for joining us. It's so fun to see all of those selfies. And our message today begins with this.
I find it difficult to talk to older generations just because either I'm written off as a dumb kid or I am just completely attacked for my point of view because it's different than theirs.
I think it's okay for our generations to see things differently.
At the end of the day, we can all disagree on what the issues are, but we need to have that mutual respect and kindness for each other to agree to disagree.
I think this is important because we have to know how to work together as a society. When we can't work together, things break down.
Ultimately, we're all Americans, we're all humans. We all have to come together, and in doing so, we have to understand that there might be differences, and those differences are usually to be celebrated.
I think that just being open to listening is the most important thing, and realizing that everyone's opinion is different and it's valid.
Ultimately, all of these issues that we're seeing, regardless of whether you're a millennial or not, Jesus is calling on us to, reach across the aisle, reach out of our comfort zone and get out of our bubble. I think we all just need to be kind to each other and really do a better job of listening and finding common ground.
I think that just relationships with people are what are gonna change this world. Having open conversations and having conversations where you're willing to listen to the other person.
You can either learn by living or you can learn by listening.
Listen.
Listen.
Listen. Listen.
Listening.
Listen.
Listen.
We kick off a sermon series today around listening. We're going to listen in this series to the voices of our younger generations, Millennials and Gen Z, and we're listening to them not because they are the future, but because they are the present. They, Millennials and Gen Z, they are the two largest generations in America today, and we're going to listen to this group as they ask questions about the really big issues, the things that they're concerned about in our world today. We're going to listen, and then we're going to, together, ask the question, what would Jesus say about these concerns? And each week we're going to discuss how we can, across generations, work together to address these big, critical issues. Several months ago, I received a text from Tom about this message that I'm going to give right now. And good luck, says Tom. Lord have mercy upon Mark. It's encouraging, isn't it? I'm a little nervous about starting this series today, but I'm mostly excited. I love and I live to bring people together and to gently challenge them to follow Christ, maybe for the first time or maybe more faithfully. I believe that God has given me a unique skill for listening, and I'm living into my calling and my purpose today by addressing the divisions that are present in our country. I want to invite you to listen with me for what God might say to you through this message today. We're basing this series off content from Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, Kansas, the largest United Methodist church in the United States. When they introduced the promo for this series, someone in their congregation leaned over to his wife and was overheard saying, well, we're not going to be here to listen to any of that nonsense. Whoa. I mentioned that story because if you think that listening to the voices of Millennials and Gen Z is nonsense, and you don't care to hear those voices, well, if you're in business, you're going to be out of business in 30 years. If you think listening to the voices of Millennials and Gen Z is nonsense, well, you're going to have a terrible relationship with your kids and with your grandchildren. If you think listening to these voices is nonsense and you care about the church, your church, or this one or another church, then it has no future if you're not listening to the voices of Millennials and Gen Z. So in this series, we're going to listen. We're going to listen together. Church of the Resurrection surveyed over 500 Millennials and Gen Zs by giving them a list of the topics that regularly show up as top concerns for those generations. They asked which of these are most urgent to you. And the top 4 that these generations chose were the 4 topics that we're going to address in this series. And we're doing our own survey as well across all generations here at Sycamore Creek, and you'll see the link on the screen. If you haven't taken that survey, I encourage you to do so. We're using our survey to look at generational differences. And in light of the survey results, each week we're going to ask the question, what would Jesus say about these things? We'll ask, what can we do then in response to what Jesus says? Now here's the thing, different generations have been shaped by different experiences. So I'm going to begin today by highlighting differences between generations. And so when we talk about generations, we know what I'm talking about. There are huge differences between different generations today. The graph that you'll see on the screen was produced in 2019 by the Pew Research Center. So note that's 2019, it was 2 years ago, so add 2 years to each of the ages listed on the screen. And on the left side of this graph is the greatest generation. Now, these are people who are born before 1928, and Some of these folks are still alive. That includes my 96-year-old grandfather, who's part of this generation. We live for the first time in history with 6 generations alive at the same time. Now, there have occasionally been some individuals from 6 generations, but today we have a large populace of 6 different generations. The next generation you'll see on the screen is the silent generation, born between 1928 and 1945. The things that shaped this generation are the Great Depression and World War II. Those two life experiences as children growing up during the Depression, and some of them who came of age and went off to fight at the end of World War II, where they lost parents or siblings in the war. Those two things had a profound impact on their lives, and generally this generation, they're very frugal and they're very responsible. Now we come to 1946 to 1964, and the next generation was when 2 million GIs came back from the war and they started having babies. This generation is the baby boom generation, the boomers, right? Ages 57 to 75. And this generation, the boomers, they experienced huge major cultural shifts. Elvis and rock and roll were part of that culture shift. The Cold War was huge for this generation. And, well, they grew up in fear of an atomic bomb with exercises in school to hide under their desks in case of a bombing, as if that would help. This generation experienced a major shifts and concerns for civil rights for everyone. Starting in the 1950s, the civil rights movement became something that shaped this generation. And, well, that continued with Dr. King and into the 1960s. This generation was the invention of the birth control pill, which fundamentally shaped how women and families planned for having children, but it was also part of mobilizing women into the workplace. Suddenly there were kids raised in homes with both mom and dad who were out of the home working. And that gives rise to the next generation, my generation, the Gen Xers, Generation X, born from 1965 to 1980. I was born at the very end of this generation in 1978, so I'm special. I'm a baby Gen Xer. This generation is also known as the latchkey kids because their mom and dads were often both at work. This generation was impacted by the boomer generation deciding, you know what, we're not going to stay in a marriage if we're not happy anymore. And there's a huge rise in divorces that impacted Gen X kids growing up. For Gen X kids, their parents were likely either divorced or they were both working, hence latchkey kids. This is the first generation to really get their hands on computers, and there were lots of things that were happening for this generation, like the Sony Walkman and the rise of video games. This generation was originally known as slackers. You remember that term? But it ends up, they're really hard workers. They care about a work-life balance because they watch their parents work like crazy to get ahead, and this generation recognized that they paid the price for that at times. And that brings us to the generations that we want to focus on today, the Millennials, born between 1981 and 1996, and those born after 1997, Generation Z. Let's take a look at those generations. The generation that grew up with these in their homes, they are Millennials. There were computers in everyone's house. That's a Macintosh from 1984, and computers shaped this generation. But so did this pivotal event in 2001. They watched the towers fall in their classrooms in school. They watched the aftermath and the reality of terrorist attacks settled in. This generation has experienced a level of connection to the world through the internet that has never been seen before. They had the capacity to have relationships with different people around the globe who spoke different languages and had different cultures. It's a mind-blowing thing that I don't think we still fully understand. Now, one of the Gen Xers gave this generation the gift of Facebook, which is part of the creation of social media. Again, I think social media is something we don't really fully understand or comprehend the impact that social media has on how we do life and how we think and how we get our news and how we have relationships. These are the Millennials, and then after them we have the Gen Zs, born after 1997. And there are some very unique things about this generation, Gen Z. Now, let me show you this on the left side of the screen. You'll see that there's a graph, and 18% of boomers were from a racial or ethnic minority. 30% of Gen Xers, 39% of Millennials, and now 48% of Gen Z are from a racial or ethnic minority. This, of course, is unprecedented in American history. When Europeans first came to the United States, they were the minority, but since that time, with the founding of the United States, most people in the United States have been white. And our culture has been dominated by people who are both white and what they like and prefer. For Gen Z, their friends, their family members, likely their spouses, they're going to be people of color. This generation experiences the world differently. In addition to that, if you look on the right side of the screen, you'll see that post-millennials or Gen Z will be the most educated of any generation in history. More Gen Z than any generation before them are going to go to college. These are the people who are going to be your doctors and your lawyers and school teachers and pastors. And they're going to be the people that you turn to for advice. In the U.S. today, 40% of Americans work for somebody who's younger than themselves. If you're still working, well, the odds are you're going to be working for someone who's younger than you. Now, Gen Z is the first generation to grow up with a president who looked like this. 2 generations before, people were fighting to not give up their seat on a bus. And then in 2008, President Obama became the first person of color to be president of the United States. This generation is the first to grow up with devices that they can touch with touch screens. And my kids are Gen Z. And well, if my parents have trouble with their iPad or their phone, they have my kids fix it or explain it for them. My kids are digital natives. They're immersed in technology. This generation doesn't send letters. They don't even send email. This is old school. They text, right? They don't even text with words or sentences, but with emojis. You know, Gen Z is breaking the mold in many ways, and along with the millennials, they're deeply concerned about social justice and inclusion. Inclusion is a huge deal for millennials and Gen Z. We'll discuss that more later in this series. Now, these generations haven't grown up ducking under desks because they're afraid of an atom bomb. They've learned to duck under their desks because there might be a threat of an active shooter in their school. So here's a chat question for you as you think about generations. What generation are you a part of? And what things do you think have shaped you and your generation? Let's discuss that.
So hopefully that gave you guys some time to think about what generation are you a part of. I started off, we were talking about this in the studio. We have a nice little mix on our team. We got representation from Millennials, Gen X. Me and Dave, I think, are the same age.
In-betweeners.
So, yeah. I prescribe to the Zennial. I know Pastor Mark didn't talk about that. We're in the Millennial.
What is a Zennial?
Zennial is like the people who got caught in between Generation X and Millennial. They say if you Google that term, Zennial starts with an X. We're the ones that had an analog childhood and we had a digital adulthood. So it's like we're kind of like that bridge between the two generations. Now this is
interesting because I was born in '93, so I'm a millennial through and through. But, you know, we didn't have really anything, you know, growing up. But maybe that's just because my parents were, like, still working hard and my mom and dad were working several jobs. And that was, like, part of how we learned how to be. Mm-hmm. That's how we gained all of the things that we now have, was from them working so hard and working several jobs. And then I found growing up, my first time out on my own, I had, like, 3 to 4 part-time jobs that I was piecing together in order to make a living.
Oh, totally. I love Teresa's answer. She says, we're boomers, but odd ones, we're able to watch church while driving north.
That's
a great answer.
Yeah, my neighbor Tony actually says he's Gen X. He saw the end of the Cold War and like the anti-communist and socialist movement and wrote in cursive. I mean, I still wrote in cursive.
We did cursive.
Yeah, we did cursive too. Isn't that funny? Like the things that you know. Slowly.
I think that something that also shapes you as a person, as a part of a generation, is like your family. So I am a millennial, and my brother is a millennial, but our siblings are definitely Gen X, and our parents are boomers. My dad is at the beginning of the boomer group.
That's right.
So like that has changed. And what I kind of was thinking that shaped our generation is that we've watched, previous generations not communicate well. Yeah. And I think that like Gen X, millennials, and whatever Gen Z is what they're calling the kids that are younger than millennials.
Uh-huh. Yeah, my younger brother who just turned like 23 this year, that's a Gen Xer.
Like we want to do
a Gen Zer.
better at communicating, which I think is kind of what this series is all about. communicating better, like they said in the video, listening, you know?
Yeah. What about you, Doug?
Gen X.
Lean in there to the
Yeah.
mic so we
Come
can
on,
hear
Chris.
you.
I'm Gen X.
You're Gen X. How did that shape like how you grew up or your generation?
I think the work ethic, obviously,
Yeah.
we did a lot more hands-on stuff, you know. It's,
Oh, definitely.
computer screens and didn't have all that. I remember the first computer we got, we didn't do much more than play a video game on it.
Yeah.
I remember having to program it in just to repeat your name over and over again.
Right.
You take computer class, there wasn't a mouse, there wasn't anything like that, so
And that
it was very
dial-up
difficult to
noise.
understand what even.
I think the first
What's the
computer
use
game
of
I
a
ever played was
computer?
like Reader Rabbit or whatever that one is called.
Yeah.
Some math game
Yes.
or something. Yeah, totally. Yes,
So
totally.
getting your hands on things was more kind of what we did around our house, you know, fixing things.
My
Oh, yeah,
grandmother,
totally.
who was a baby boomer, was like part of building some of those first computers that filled an entire room, and she would be
Oh, yeah.
plugging
Oh,
circuits
wow.
Oh,
into
my
different
goodness.
things and inputs because it's like a giant brain.
And now we have computers that
And now
can
we
fit
have-
in our hands.
yeah, computers
Yeah.
in the palm of our hand. Wild.
Amazing.
Let's get back to what Mark was saying about this and see what that all means.
Yes.
So I spent a lot of time just now on these generations to give you a reminder that Millennials and Gen Z generations, they're not the future, they're the present, they're the right now. They are the two largest generations alive today, and they're going to shape our world. And they have questions, they have concerns, and we're going to listen to understand, listen. Now, one of the top concerns for Millennials and Gen Z is a concern over the polarization in our country. In nearly every survey of Gen Z and Millennials, this topic rises to the top. They're deeply concerned about how divided we are as a nation. So let's dive into that. In 2018, the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, that's CIRCLE, at Tufts University, they did a survey of 18 to 24-year-olds, and they found that 82% of young adults said they were concerned about the values of the American people. Now pay attention to this. In the generations past, the older generation was concerned about the values of the younger generation. Today, young adults are concerned about the values of the older generations. And that's significant to understanding generational differences. When it came to the concerns they had about those values, one of the most important values to young people was how we treat each other and the polarization in our country. 57% of young people in this survey said they were losing faith in American democracy. We feel this in Washington. We feel this in conversations with our families together for holidays. We feel this on social media. We feel it here in Lansing. A Church of the Resurrection asked young adults, what experiences do you have with political polarization? And this is what they said.
Most older generations have such strong opinions that I am nervous to talk to them about my beliefs and my opinions. I've kind of been told by my parents to not bring it up around older generations just because I'm supposed to respect the people older than me, and I can get heated about my topics that I am passionate about.
When you look at Congress, for example, and you see a bunch of baby boomers in power leading the country down a path that many would agree is polarizing.
In my family, we have very different political opinions and views. Some of the older generations in our family have some, whereas my sister and I, who are both millennials, have very different ones. We find it very difficult in our family to have those conversations without it growing into something that's negative and that creates arguments or hurt feelings. I would love to see that begin to change and us to address that and address how to have good conversations and healthy conversations.
And so it's frustrating to view the political system just because we're stuck.
We are stuck. We are stuck. I think we can all agree on that, right? Next week, we'll talk about mental health, and there have been numerous studies that have shown that young people are among the most anxious and stressed out generations since they started tracking these things. Now, why are they stressed out and anxious? Well, part of this, I think, is the environment in our country where there's constant conflict. The Pew Research Center has been doing polling since 1994 on Republicans and Democrats to see how close together they really are or how far apart they actually are. Listen to what they wrote following the election of Joe Biden as president. Americans have rarely been as polarized as they are today. As polarized as they are today. And they continue. A month before the election, roughly 8 in 10 registered voters in both camps said their differences with the other side were about core American values. And roughly 9 in 10, again in both camps, worried that a victory by the other would lead to lasting harm to the United States. That's polarization. And what the Pew Research Center has found is that among Democrats and among Republicans, they've moved farther away from each other over the past 20 years. I don't think this is surprising data to any of us. We feel this. We experience it. I recently heard about Jonathan Haidt. He's a social psychologist at New York University, and he has talked about polarization. He said that there are a number of major serious issues, different problems that we are facing as a nation and as a world. He says they're all solvable problems if we would only talk with each other. And he concludes we have to learn to listen. This polarization has been going on for years. It's not new, but it seems to be getting worse. Well, why is that? Multiple researchers have found that we tend to live with and interact with people who see the world the same way that we see it. We often value sameness. So most of the people we interact with think the same way we do. And if they don't, well, they're often quiet because it's uncomfortable to buck the crowd. We do this, right, with churches. We find a church where everyone agrees and we see the world similarly, and we do this with our news sources. We know that there are different news sources, and we know what they stand for and they represent, and we tend to look for news that confirms our own feelings or thoughts. It's called a confirmation bias. Most of us, we don't do research. We don't see if our bias is correct. We find someone who will confirm what we already think and feel. And we do this even more now with social media. 59% of millennials and Gen Zs, they use social media as their primary news source. Now, social media is brilliant at providing news because it will parrot back to you exactly what you feel and think. And here's another challenge with social media. We now live in tweets and memes that get passed around and forwarded from person to person. And let me ask you this tough question. Do you think any complex ethical or moral or political issue can be easily reduced to a tweet or a meme? Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't use memes or tweets or have an opinion. We should, but it's one thing to believe something and it's right, and it's another thing to poke someone in the eye on social media. I'm going to irritate you. I'm going to poke you. And what happens is we go back and forth with memes and tweets and reposts that move us further and further away from each other and more into our respective camps. So sometimes a tweet or a repost of someone on Facebook, it's not actually the best way to influence someone else. I don't know if you thought about that. We don't listen well to differing memes or tweets. Now, it's not all bad, so here's a question for discussion. What are the strengths and weaknesses of social media for political discussion? Let's discuss.
Yeah, those were some really good points that Pastor Mark was making. And as I'm thinking about it, what are the strengths and weaknesses of social media? My initial thought is if you want something to get out there fast and quick, social media is definitely that tool.
Sure.
But the weakness, and I call it a danger of it, I saw the comment you made in the chat, is that you can't really get informative, deep understanding of what's going on with a tweet or a meme, or fact checking information on social media is very hard to do too. You have to really know what your sources are and where they lie and what's the roots and history of it, and
absolutely the context for sure. The funny thing about this is my generation was the first one to really have memes. It's our innate humor. It's what we've done to you all, and I'm so sorry. But but before we had memes, we had things like political cartoons.
Yep.
And everybody can kind of understand that. It's not the full picture. It's a little blip. It's a little comment. It's a little piece of the story. And a lot of it gets missing. The context is missing. And I actually just saw this on Facebook this week. Now, some of you know this about me. I don't use Facebook except for work. It grates on me like a cheese grater. It makes me exhausted. I really try not to use it, but it is good for the spread of information and connection with others. And really, when it comes to social media, it's like that's not the place for a political discussion. You can't get the full story there. And the real place for it is, you know, when you see those comments and you see those memes, it's opening up the opportunity for discussion one-on-one with that person, whether that's in a chat or something like that. And that's the strength of connection, that if you actually make the step to talk to that person privately, you can actually have a discussion. But like if you're just gonna talk back and forth in the comments, I don't see that getting anywhere.
Because as we saw, like over the past year, people have gotten really comfortable on social media.
Well, and that back and forth, there's like no listening involved in it. It's just like, let me one up you so I can sound smarter than you. And, and prove you wrong.
Prove you wrong or prove me right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
They're gonna continue to.
Oh, totally. I think social
their
media is
opinion.
used as a way to like boost somebody's self-ego, like rather than actually figuring out what the facts are.
Right. It's kind of like what Pastor Mark was talking about, that sameness. And thanks to the algorithms.
That one hurt me. I was like, ooh, that's a value.
It generates the sameness and the confirmation bias that he mentioned. So you're constantly are going to see what you want to see.
Yep.
And I think there's something about social media that gives people this like sense of anonymity. It's like that screen or that veil that they are allowing themselves to be more
bold
nasty,
than usual.
Bold, yeah.
You may have a
Their name, they can.
Yes, you can
have their
totally
picture up
disguise who you are. Yes.
not have the
You don't know what
picture.
generation they are. They could say they're Generation Z, but they're actually Generation X. You know?
Right, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think there's positives too.
There definitely are.
Yeah.
I like when people post like articles. I like it. I do go and read the article. I won't repost something if I haven't read it.
Yeah.
But I think so. There is ways that it can be positive.
There's a lot of subjects I've found just in social media that I never was aware of before.
Yeah, definitely.
People post something, I'm like, well, I wasn't even aware of this.
Yes, exactly.
You can learn a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark Raymond mentioned something about an echo chamber, and that kind of goes back to what you were saying, Tiffany, with like finding what you're looking for, that confirmation bias too. Yeah, but yeah, there's a lot of good information out there too.
Yeah, so let's go back and see what else Mark has for us.
Social media does have strengths and weaknesses. Now, one of the weaknesses is that it can cause division, as I've said. All of these things are working together to move us further and further apart. And what happens now is we find it hard to even be with people who see things differently than us. Let me repeat that. We find it hard now to even be with people who see things differently than us. And that's a problem. You see, at its core, we have a loving people problem. And that's a challenge for us to live out our faith, because that's one of the big ones. It's one of the guiding principles of following Jesus, right? It's to love our neighbor as ourself. And well, I hope to push you a little bit today on that. And every time I do that, every time I push you, I have to be careful, and so do you. I have to ask myself, is my job to make myself feel better by poking you in the eye, or is it to actually influence you? And if I'm going to influence you, then I better ask, what's the best way to do that? You see, we are deeply divided politically here in the United States, and we saw that play out again and again in different ways through the election last year and then leading up to the inauguration in January. As a pastor of Sycamore Creek, I'm a pastor to people who are strong Republicans and supporters of former President Trump. I'm a pastor to people who are in the middle. I'm a pastor to people who are strong Democrats and supporters of current President Joe Biden. Throw in a pandemic, It's been a fun year to be a pastor, let me tell you. And I really am 42, by the way. In the midst of political divisions, I have opinions myself. I have strong opinions. And I recognize that many of you have strong opinions. And I've asked myself a lot lately, what is the approach that Jesus took to the things that were going on in his day? You see, you can look through the Gospels for the times that Jesus preached against a political leader, specifically Herod Antipas or Pontius Pilate or Emperor Tiberius. Do you know how many you'll find? None. Jesus mentioned Herod Antipas once, and he called him that fox, which is probably a negative thing, but that's it. And as a reminder, these people were crucifying Jews. They were doing terrible things. And what Jesus did instead, though, is he called people to live out a faith in which God is their king. He gave illustrations saying, like, the kingdom of God is like this, and he said, this is what you should be doing. Things like care for the marginalized, care for the hungry and thirsty and naked and sick and imprisoned, care for the immigrant or stranger among you. Love your enemy and love your neighbor. Go and be salt and light to the world around you. Jesus talked about these things, but he didn't directly address Tiberius or Pontius Pilate or Herod Antipas. This is what Jesus did. Jesus called people to live differently in their world. We need to find commonality in obeying Jesus and living differently. Surely we can agree that keeping kids in cages is not right. Surely we can agree that race, the race that you were born with, shouldn't dictate your economic outlook in life. Surely we can agree that bullying speech has no place in our schools. Surely we can agree that war and assassination and weapons are not something to be taken lightly. Surely we can agree on lots of core values. Let's start there with commonality and work together to live differently in our world. Now, you didn't come to worship today to hear a talk on politics, and I'm not going to give you one. But I think if I were to sit down today with you and talk politics, I would tell you that there are certain things that our politicians get right, and there are certain things they get wrong. And our world has become so polarized, especially around our former president, Donald Trump, that I say that there are certain policies of his that I agree with and fit with following Jesus, I'm going to get in big trouble with the Democrats. And if I say there are certain policies that he got wrong and that don't reflect the Gospels and following Jesus, I'm going to get in trouble with most Republicans. And we have become so divided that it's incredibly difficult to be president. One side thinks you can do no wrong. The other side thinks you can do no right. And that brings me back to influence and influencing someone. I ask myself all the time, how do you actually influence people? This is a key question. And I have found that when you start attacking people, when you start calling them names, well, very seldom do they listen to anything that you say after that. If you can't find anything good, or if you can't treat that person as a human being, it's going to be really hard to have a conversation that changes anything. So here's another question. How do we talk about our divisions in a way that might lead to change? I'm going to give you some thoughts on that. As Christians, we look to the scriptures and we see what they have to teach us, and then we live that out. And I'll tell you, I want you to have passionate political beliefs. I want you to stand strong for things like fighting injustice and being concerned for the poor and the sanctity of life and a whole host of other things that come at us right out of the Bible. But how do we sit down and talk about those things in a way that might lead to change? Well, the thing is, if we look at the New Testament, every single one of the books in the New Testament was written with the backdrop of conflict. In the Gospels, well, you can find conflict underlying all the stories about Jesus. You can find conflict in the book of Acts and in all the letters of the New Testament. There's conflict everywhere. So the writers of the New Testament are constantly addressing conflict all the time. In 1 Corinthians 13, there's a well-known passage where Paul is writing to the church at Corinth, which was deeply divided and broken. And Paul wrote to this church and he said, if I speak in tongues of human beings and of angels, but I don't have love, I'm a clanging gong or a clashing cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and I know all the mysteries and everything else, and if I have such complete faith that I can move mountains but I don't have love, I'm nothing. I hope it's clear here to you that love here in this letter is not a warm, fuzzy feeling. It's a dogged determination to treat another person as a human being. It's about another person loving them, caring for them through action. Paul continues, if I give away everything that I have and I hand over my own body to feel good about what I've done, but I don't have love, I receive no benefit whatsoever. Then Paul describes what love is for us, and maybe this is how we should treat each other. Maybe this is how we should march for causes that we believe in. Maybe this is how we should use social media. Love is patient. Love is kind. It isn't jealous. It doesn't brag. It isn't arrogant. It isn't rude. It doesn't seek its own advantage. It isn't irritable. It doesn't keep a record of complaints. It isn't happy with injustice, but is happy with the truth. Love puts up with all things, trusts in all things, hopes for all things, endures all things. Paul concludes that this kind of love, it never fails. We have to be people who care deeply about what's going on in our world. We're going to talk about some of these things over the next few weeks, but we have to do that in a way that might actually bring about change, or we just push people further and further away. Jesus talked about love in the midst of division this way in the Sermon on the Mount. He said, "You have heard that it was said, you must love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who harass you, so that you will be acting as children of your Father who is in heaven." Whew. That's a high standard, isn't it? Are you living that out? That's how we practice love when it comes to political division. That's how we love the person with the opposite view from us. The more obnoxious they are, the more I'm going to work to love them. And it may be that practice of loving them, that it changes them, and in the process, it changes me too. As James writes, loving in the midst of disagreement, it looks like lots of listening and being slow to speak and slow to get angry. I don't think we do enough of that, especially online. This loving people we disagree with stuff is really hard, especially when they think or say things that hurt us. I want to wrestle with this a little bit. So here's another question for discussion. What are your top tips for having loving conversations across political divisions? Let's discuss that.
What are your top tips for having loving political conversations or conversations across political divisions, Tiffany?
Yeah, you know what? You beat me to it. I was going to ask you
You
first,
can ask
but
me? Oh, shit.
because I mean, Pastor Mark is really challenging us with this, and those scriptures were on point to bringing out. I was thinking as I was listening, I was thinking this series could also be called "Where's the Love?" Because I really think that's the question that Jesus might propose back to us.
Right.
That's when he was talking about the Republicans and Democrats, and even those are in the middle. Where's the love?
Right.
Because right now we are actually sounding like clinging cymbals as a nation, and so that's my actual thought. It's not necessarily an answer to the question.
It's like, man, where do we go from here?
I think where it begins is, teachings like this and starting to teach our different generations about what are the different aspects of love. Because when we think of love, we think about, the TV shows that we see on TV, where people are trying to find romantic interests.
Right.
That's where my mind gravitates to. But then there's these other facets of love that, like what he said, is the deep, dogmatic push to treat someone as a human. We need to talk about
the
love.
Greeks have so many different words for love, and I recently reviewed them again in actually conversation about a D&D character, so sorry about that. But it was about, self-love and brotherly love and the love between families and siblings, and they have different words for each kind and for the love of God. They have agape, right? For the love of God. But it is, where is the love in political discussions? And what I think of is I think of our series on political discussions, which we had an entire series.
So
this is like a
good.
tiny snippet of that, but we had an entire series called I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening, and where we took information from the podcast and book I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening about having loving discussions across political divisions.
And these two women are different in their political
That's
opinions.
right.
They are on either side of the fence, so to speak.
And their biggest tip was to be curious, to find a common ground, to listen to one another. And like I've found that worked in practice once so far, because that's how brave I've been once.
Word.
Is with my dad, who is very different from me politically, but values curiosity and
Yay.
is willing to listen to me and respects me. And I respect him. So we're able to talk and listen to one another and have a discussion where we don't always agree, but we don't fight either.
That's good. That's good.
I'm dying to know, Doug, do you have any brilliant suggestions for this?
Please.
I hear what you're saying. I think that it has a little bit to do with respecting someone else's opinion on their political beliefs, but also not taking it too personally.
Totally.
That when somebody disagrees or has a different opinion than you, oftentimes I think that people get angry or confrontational, maybe not angry, but because they start to take it personally that, hey, you don't believe what I believe in, and you're dissing me in some way. So I think if you just step back a little bit, be curious, like you're saying, and just be patient with people, and don't take it so serious as someone else's opinion. I've never been able to sway someone else's opinion on political beliefs.
Oh,
Right.
definitely.
So I just listen to what they have to say, and I'm like, I get where you're coming from.
Yes, yeah.
But this is where I'm coming from. So
I think that you
totally.
kind of said this, and it was one of the most important takeaways that I had from the series that Carola mentioned, which is also a book, and they have a podcast if anybody's interested. What are they called? The Pantsuit Politics
Pantsuit Politics,
is their blog
Super
or
cool.
whatever it's called. Anyways, they said to remember who you're talking to. And so that is so important, because most of the time when I'm having these conversations, it's with somebody I really love and care about. So I don't want to attack them because I love and care about them, even if they believe differently than me.
Definitely. Definitely.
Exactly.
Let's see if Mark can show us where the love is.
Yes.
Here's the thing. We can love people well, and we can march and speak out for causes we believe in. But we can't love people well and march and say hateful things about other people while we're marching. That undermines everything we're marching for. We can love people well and we can be on social media, but it's going to require slowing down and being careful with our posts. We can be passionate and we can point out that things that there are people need to know that can't be right. And we can still love. We can still love the people who we're speaking to, even those who disagree with us. I want to share with you a final story about how that's done from the movie The Two Popes. I don't know, have you seen that movie, The Two Popes? It's pretty marvelous. In the movie is Pope Benedict, who wants to retire as Pope. No one has done that in like 700 years. And he wants to retire, but he doesn't want the wrong guy to be Pope after him. So he's going to keep going if the wrong guy is going to be Pope. And the wrong guy is Cardinal Bergoglio, who's in Latin America, who will ultimately become Pope Francis. Now, Pope Benedict was worried Cardinal Bergoglio was going to become Pope because he totally disagreed with him. Cardinal Bergoglio, well, he also didn't agree with Pope Benedict, and he also wants to retire. He's tired of being a cardinal, but he has to have the Pope's permission to retire, so he flies to Rome to meet with the Pope, and they start talking. Pope Benedict says, I don't agree with anything that you say. I disagree with you on everything, your positions, everything. But they end up spending 2 days together. And at the end of 2 days together, listening to each other, hearing each other's stories, something changes. Pope Benedict decides that maybe it would be a good thing for the church for Cardinal Bergoglio to become Pope. Watch this scene from the movie.
Your style and your methods are entirely different to mine. I don't agree with most of the things you say, think, or do, but for some strange reason, now I can see a necessity for Bergoglio.
So that's a fictionalized account of what happened, and well, I have no clue, let's be honest, if that scene really happened in real life, but I love the picture of it. Pope Benedict, who is very conservative on lots of things, looks at Cardinal Bergoglio and essentially says, I see your heart. I see who you are. I've listened to you. And maybe the church needs what you have. And that's what happened in the end. Cardinal Bergoglio became Pope Francis. Now, Cardinal Bergoglio chose his name as Pope in honor of St. Francis of Assisi. It was a prayer of St. Francis, probably not actually written by this St. Francis, but it became popular in World War I and then even more popular in World War II. 2 wars where millions of people lost their lives. In closing, I'm going to invite you to pray this prayer with me together. You'll see the words on the screen. Let's pray. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. Amen.
Amen. That was a good prayer. I think we should probably make that available on social media so that we can be able to rehearse that throughout the week. Because I feel like the more you rehearse things, God, you're opening yourself up to God to enter into your heart so that you can enter into these types of conversations with love, with God's love. And so, yeah.
I love that line about being an instrument of God's peace, because if you go into everything thinking, how does this achieve that goal of God's peace? You know, that's a good way to start a conversation, start an interaction. Yeah.
So here are our announcements for the week.
And here's how you can connect with us.
What would Jesus say about connecting with us at Sycamore Creek? Even if you can only do one of these things this morning, fill out the connection card at sycamorecreekchurch.org/connect so we can get to know you better. First-time guests, when you fill out a connection card, you'll get a free book, You'll Get Through This by Max Lucado. After new information, it's time to put on our masks. The Ingham County Health Department is now recommending everyone mask up indoors, so let's keep each other safe by wearing our masks during indoor worship. You know you want to hang out with a pastor and talk spirituality at a pub. I mean, who wouldn't? Mark your calendar for the next Pastor Outside the Pub event with Pastor Tom, Monday, August 23rd from 7 to 9 p.m. at Buddy's in Holt. The South Lansing Art Festival returns October 3rd, 2021. Come experience the unique South Lansing Art Festival characterized by the local artists in all different mediums on October 3rd. Register now for Congregations Organizing for Racial Reconciliation Understanding Workshop, November 12th through 13th. Register now and save the date to come together and be a part of something bringing your community and your world closer together. Connect with us using Sycamore Creek's app. You can give through the app, listen to sermons online, and access your Bible all right from your phone. Simply type in SCCMI on any mobile device to find us on the app. Not interested in the app but still want to give online? Head to sycamorecreekchurch.org/give and you'll have options there too. Let's take it back to the studio to keep celebrating all the things that your giving makes possible.
This week we're celebrating the kids' the Teen Fuel celebration, summer celebration.
Yep, that they just had last week.
Yeah.
And that's what that picture is. Several of these pictures.
Yeah. Dave Wassinger is here in the studio with us today, and he mentioned that was it Tom or Mark? Pastor Tom
almost ran over his daughter.
Alice in the go-karts.
Rammed her in.
Yes. You can't buy joy like this, friends. Look at their faces. They just look so pleased. I love this one of Mark. This is hilarious. Look at his face. He's clearly cracking up. And this is just pure joy right here. I love to see people coming together, especially after the couple years we've had. What an awesome celebration. Your giving helps make that possible, so thank you.
Yeah, and so as we conclude our service, we have Doug and Gretchen here to sing the song "We Belong Each Other," which is so befitting for this message. And while you're listening to them in worship, answer this question in the chat: what clubs or groups do you belong to?
Ain't no wall can divide us, no matter how high. Ain't no storm can untie us, for all it may try. We're all leaves on the same tree, under one sky. Don't let nobody tell you otherwise. We belong to each other. We are sister and brother, born to love one another. It's whispered by the wind to all living things. It's in every sunrise. It's what the wild bird sings. It shines in newborn eyes, faces lined and worn. It's the tie that binds us all, and it won't be torn. We belong to each other. We are sister and brother, born to love one another. Ooh, 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 ooh. We are ancient stars, turn flesh and bone. We're all travelers on a bus ride home. Yeah, we laugh and we cry, we rise and we fall. Yeah, we fuss and we fight, but through it all, we belong to each other. We are sister and brother, born to love one another. We belong to each other. We are sister and brother, born to love one another. We're all leaves on the same tree, waves on the same sea. You and me, we belong to each other. Woo! Whoa, yeah. That was great.
Thank you, Gretchen and Doug, for that.
That's a Garth Brooks song, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And you picked out this meme.
Yeah, well, I have a special fondness for Darth Maul, but I have a feeling that Darth Brooks would win in a fight, personally.
Oh, yeah, especially with that guitar.
With that guitar, yeah, absolutely. So what clubs or groups do you belong to, Tiffany?
So I am a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. That is a group of college-educated women who believe in service to all mankind, education, and sisterhood. So it's cool to have sisters around the globe that we all are a part of. It's really cool, kind of, because even with me and my family, when we moved from Grand Rapids to Lansing, the fact that I'm in this sorority, it was just immediate connection, just connected with a chapter here, and they helped me find a doctor because I know we were pregnant with our third daughter, and so it was like immediate plug-in to, you know, finding different things around the city. And so that's one thing I really love about being a part of my sorority.
That is awesome.
Yeah,
I've heard it's a really like good community to be a part of. My communities, my clubs are a lot more like loose. I'm part of a clan of gamers online that I organize together because I'm the weirdo, I'm the organizer. So I organize all the games and the raids and all the things, you know. Because I'm the cool one, right?
You're cool,
yeah.
So you organize things.
Yeah, totally. That's totally why it is. No, they really appreciate that. A lot of times for like my D&D groups, my Dungeons and Dragons groups and things like that, which I'm in 3 right now. It just keeps growing. I keep meeting more nerds. And it's amazing. And it's super fun. We really, you know, when someone's down and they call on, you know, one of the members of the group, we're there for each other. We get to be really great friends and create an entire world together a couple times a week. And that's just such an amazing creative expression. And it's really cool. It's really cool.
You know, us creative types, not very many of us are organized, so I'm sure they really appreciate you.
They do. They've told me a few times, they're like, without you, none of this would be possible. And I'm like, oh, shucks.
Do you belong to any groups, Doug?
Yeah, I've got several bands. And
yes. North of 5 with our very own Jeremy Kratke.
Very cool.
And Paul Wozniak.
A lot of open mic things I go to and stuff like that. Mostly musical based. But
it's a great way to bring people together.
A sport or something.
I've been doing like different groups and clubs since I was in high school. I was in Key Club, which is the high school version of Kiwanis. Band, choir. I went to college and I did a social group, which at Christian college is similar to a sorority, but it's called a social group.
Oh, okay.
And then theater. I mean, if you're a musician or in theater, there's like, it's impossible to not be in a group. Definitely. I came home from college and I was like, if I don't do theater, I will die. So I immediately started auditioning for like Riverwalk and stuff like that.
And those relationships in theater last so long.
Yes.
I have friendships who, oh my gosh, the amount of change that the past year has been not being together, and I'm only seeing their like updates on social media and things like that. It's like, wow, I really wish we could get back into the theater.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Speaking of long-lasting relationships, this weekend, my high school class of 2001, we celebrating our 20th year high school reunion.
20 years, that's crazy.
And so, being away from each other that long, me and my husband, he was like, how you think it's going to be? I said, I think it's going to be exciting. And it was. It's like a burst of energy. I love my class. So shout out to 2001 Muskegon High School.
Very cool. And congratulations. And hopefully many of you have safe and wonderful reunions coming up as we go into the next week. Next week, we're talking about mental health, aren't we?
Yep. Yeah, so we'll have a special guest coming in. She's a counselor in Grand Rapids, Julia Williams. So we'll have her, and then we also have 2 other counselors that are teaching. So it should be an exciting, informative message next
Jana Opperly and Rebecca Fitton coming to do that message. So we have 2 of our very own partners and who are licensed professional counselors as well as doctors of their field. So that's not going to be something you want to miss. It's
and then we'll have Anthony returning back with us.
Yes,
the player. The player music.
It's going to be awesome. So tune in with us next week for episode 2. That's all for now, friends. Thanks for joining us this morning.
All right, be best.
Peace out.
Peace.